Hi everybody, and welcome to unit number 2. As we discussed in the previous unit, one of the choices you can make in negotiation has to do with whether you approach negotiation as a cooperative venture or as a competitive venture. Of course, you don't always make this choice on your own because your counterpart might also be making this decision. Sometimes those decisions merge very well with one another and sometimes they don't. Sometimes, whether by choice or through your counterpart's choice, you might find yourself engaging in a mode of negotiation that is on the competitive side of the spectrum. You might find yourself treating your counterpart as an opponent. You might find yourself trying to get just as much as you can from your counterpart, and your counterpart trying to get just as much as he or she can from you, and you're not working together in order to work for mutual gain. In such a situation, parties often develop an all-or-nothing mindset. They think that they are engaged in what is called a zero-sum game. In a zero-sum game, anything that I gain comes at your expense, anything that you gain comes at my expense, so we all try to get as much as possible at the other's expense and not to let the other get anything at our expense. Of course, when we take this to the extreme, we are in this all or nothing, this binary mindset that we either win or we lose. For example, a game of basketball is a win or lose proposition. It's not a cooperative venture, and at the end of the game, only one team is pronounced the winner. Bringing this into a more familiar negotiation situation, picture two people who are negotiating over ownership of a book. Each person says that the book belongs to them and that the other should give them the book. Now, the book is going to be decided one way or another in its entirety. A solution in which one party will get the first 6 chapters and the other party will get the second 6 chapters is obviously an undesirable solution, as undesirable as in actually splitting the baby in two in the biblical story of King Solomon. So some cases really do seem to lend themselves to an all-or-nothing mindset. And in those situations, parties tend towards competitive actions, one against the other. So that's the mindset of competitive negotiation. In this unit, we're going to focus on one particular style of competitive negotiation, which is called bargaining. And when do we bargain? We bargain in those cases when we are acting competitively about something that is quantifiable. In other words, if the object of this negotiation, if the value that we each would prefer to take home is something that you can quantify, something you can count, something you can break down into individual units, then by its very nature of being quantifiable, it's also something that is dividable. And since it is dividable, it is something that we can engage in bargaining over. And the bargaining will take the form of each of us trying to get as much of that object or of that value as possible. What might be some common examples of quantifiable things that we find ourselves bargaining over? Well, we bargain over our salary. We might bargain over the price of a used car. We might bargain over the amount of rent that we will pay our landlady or that we will charge our tenant. Each of these things is quantifiable, dividable, and thereby bargainable. So we engage in bargaining behavior over these things. Anytime we're negotiating a business deal that includes the price of a particular unit, whatever it is, whether it's a unit that is a truck or a computer or a nail, anytime we are discussing the price of a unit, the price is something that is quantifiable, and therefore we engage in bargaining. So it becomes clear very quickly that we often engage in bargaining over money, because money is ultimately quantifiable. However, we don't only bargain over money. We bargain over other things that are either quantifiable themselves, such as, let's say, time, or things that can be translated into something quantifiable. So take two parents who are separating, and they are negotiating over the child. So obviously the child herself is not quantifiable, but time with the child is quantifiable. So if you can translate and reframe the discussion from being about who will get the child to being a discussion about how much time will I get to spend with the child, then this question of how much time is now something that we can engage in bargaining over. Now, what is bargaining as opposed to any other form of negotiation? Bargaining is a very recognizable pattern of negotiation that once we name it, you will all be familiar with and say, oh, I did that just today, yesterday, last week. Bargaining refers to a style of negotiation whereby each party opens up with an opening position. Okay? Generally speaking, the seller opens high and the buyer opens low. And very often they take a more extreme position, hoping that the other will pay their price. So each party opens up with an opening position, and then they make small moves, one towards the other. These moves are called concessions. Okay? And if parties make enough concessions towards one another, then there's a chance that they will wind up meeting and having an agreement. And of course, if they are unable or unwilling to make enough concessions along the way, then there is a chance that they will remain with some distance between them and the negotiation will end in impasse. That is what is called a bargaining dynamic, a bargaining process, or as it's often called, a bargaining dance. Now that we've described the bargaining dance, you might be able to remember quite a number of situations you've engaged in which you have applied this or engaged in this yourself. As I said, anytime we're talking about money, we often slide into bargaining, and the same anytime we talk about time. There are some things that we don't bargain about, although we negotiate about them. We negotiate relationships. We negotiate friendship. We negotiate love, but we don't bargain over it, because these are things that you can't split up, divide. I'll take 20, you take 80. Paul Simon wrote, "Negotiations and love songs are often mistaken for one of the same." And that is true about negotiation, but it is not true about bargaining. You can't bargain over love. Another thing to keep in mind is that bargaining is not always a standalone process, as if we say, okay, we're in a competitive mindset and there's money on the table, so now we will only engage in bargaining. No. Very often what happens is that bargaining is something that happens at the end of another type of process. You could be engaged in the most cooperative process in the world and still find at the end of the process that you have a certain quantifiable surplus that you need to decide who's going to get. So, for example, say two businesses whose representatives have sat down to negotiate a joint venture between the two companies that will make both companies a lot of money. And after they've structured all the details of this multi-million deal and done the entire budget and who gives what and who gets what, they discover that at the end of all this, they expect to be left with a $10,000 surplus. The answer is, in the end, that the person who is the better bargainer will get the larger chunk of this surplus. In the negotiation world, there is often quite a bit of critique leveled at bargaining. Theorists and practitioners alike might say that bargaining is inefficient, that it's ineffective, that it damages relationships, and that in general it's a bad idea and something to be avoided. While that might be true, even if you were to try to avoid bargaining as often as you can, you won't always be able to avoid it. In some contexts, in some situations, it will just be the thing that happens. And in those situations, if you know how to do it, and if you know how to do it well, you stand to come out all right. And if you don't know how to do it, then you stand to suffer loss. So it pays, before you decide when to use it, in what situations, or how to avoid it, it pays to know what bargaining is, what the basic dynamics are, what some of the basic tactics that you might use or could be used against you are, And then when you engage in it, either because you want to or because you have to, you will be able to do a pretty good job for yourself. In the end, often when we find ourselves engaged in a bargaining situation, we are bargaining for the surplus of a particular deal, in which successfully bargaining for that surplus will be good for us. So take the basic situation of we are bargaining over the price of a used car. If we can manage to bargain our way down, if we are buying the car, if we can manage to bargain the price down by $1,000, then that is a solid gain of $1,000. If we are bargaining for our salary and we are able to raise our yearly salary through our bargaining skills by $3,000, then that is a gain of $3,000 a year. In the end, often bargaining and negotiation, people focus on, well, what is the bare bones minimum I need in order to say yes here? But think about it this way. When we're bargaining over the surplus, when we're out to scratch out just a little more for ourselves, very often it's in this extra padding, this extra surplus, in which we find our true benefits. This can be very valuable to us. It can buy us peace of mind. Just this little extra surplus that we were able to carve out for ourselves. So it really does pay to be mindful and to learn about it. And that's what we're going to do this week. Let's get started.